precluding change. 2 warrants. First, governmental complacency. As Cato Blank explains, reparations signal the debt America owes to African Americans have been paid, meaning further calls for help down the road would be met with contempt and be rejected. The example, reparations to Native Americans after which we've seen no meaningful progress or reform directed towards them. Second, societal complacency. As Burkett writes, reparations don't the fundamental realities of racism, rather creating an illusion of change where people don't believe that racism is over. This ignorance would thereby perpetuate the very discrimination that gave rise to the original injuries. Worse, Lowry writes that any future harms faced by African Americans would be explained through stereotypes that blame the victims by painting the picture that the blacks are a lost cause. Massey, the Congressional Quarterly, puts it best. America will say, it's not our problem, you've been paid. There are 2 impacts. First, a death knell for reforms. Millman v. NYT writes that reparations stiff opposition to other policies designed to address racial disparities, and McCarran of DePaul notes that public opinion would be tipped against the interests of blacks on long term, leading to the loss of programs like affirmative action that already exist. Blank's The Cato Institute thus concludes that the predictable costs and consequences of reparations would far outweigh any benefits. Second, derailing the civil rights agenda. Epstein of the University of Chicago notes that reparations payments would be weakened calls for action from social movements like Black Lives Matter, as Americans would be compelled to put those issues aside and focus on something else. Chen of Michigan studies this effect and finds that a decrease in civil rights mobilization reduces the probability of fair policy outcomes by 3 times. As Van Ditch continues, when the dominant consensus is that racism is no longer an issue, there are no solutions. Contention 2 is destructive discourse. 2 warrants. First, the rights of coverage. The media, which has both a vested interest and known history of misrepresenting and undermining the African American community, would broadcast the positions of the French opposition to reparations, implicitly legitimizing their views. For example, media would publicize stories about African Americans misusing the money. Already, Jacqueline Bacon of FAIR notes that media slants coverage against reparations advocates supporting the stereotype of the angry and vindictive African Americans seeking revenge. The payment of reparations would therefore entrench negative perceptions of African Americans. Dixon of the University of Illinois writes that exposure to biased coverage allows for the internalization of implicit biases and stereotypes. This will always outweigh positive discourse because, as Van Ditch concludes, media is the principal shaper of public opinion on race. Second, by getting lost in the past. Brophy of the University of North Carolina makes it very clear reparations are inherently backward-looking policies, meaning that their primary focus is on historical injustices, keeping the spotlight on history incites counterproductive comparisons between the past and the present, because as NPR writes, whereas blacks seek progress as where we are and where we should be, whites see it as where we were and how far we've come. Thus, Franklin Gilliam of the Frameworks Institute concludes that conversations about race cannot begin with historical injustice. He compares his backwards-looking discourse to other forms of racial discourse, namely those focused on solving current disparities and finding they reduced anti-black bias by 7% and increased support for policies that benefit minorities by 9%, whereas backwards-looking discourse was a non-starter for future policy discussion. Contention 3 is political retaliation. 2 warrants. First, budget cuts. The Congressional Institute writes that the House's cut-go procedures require that any increase in mandatory spending must be offset by an equal or greater decrease in other expenditures. The Center for Budget and Policy Priorities confirms that in the most recent series of budget cuts, 67% of the funding came straight out of the social safety net. Mercia of Oxford University writes that this give-and-take exchange between race-based reparations and needs-based programs is one that the affirmative can never overcome because non-race-restricted action always affects more people in need. Indeed, the Pew Research Center writes that the safety net keeps 40 million African Americans out of poverty annually. Reparations cannot be justified as the Human Rights Watch concludes that as long as economic resources for reparations are limited, they must be allocated based on the greatest level of need. Second, voting patterns. Bird of the Greenlighting Institute enumerates that 84% of non-black Americans believe that fighting racism is no longer a worthwhile endeavor, which is why Brophy writes that reparations would provoke a wave of public backlash at the voting booth. The Racism Review writes that racially angered groups have a greater tendency to vote in a way that undermines black representation. To make things worse, Jasinski, the Federalist, warns that reparations would propagate the formation of white voting blocks within elections by framing African Americans as a common enemy. Crespi, the Public Opinion Quarterly, predicts that block voting would severely deaden elections and stack the odds against the minorities. According to O'Brien of the University of Virginia, blocks have over 2 times the influence of non-block voters. Raftery of NBC News adds that when voters perceive disenfranchisement, whether it really exists or not, they think my vote doesn't matter anyways, so why bother? This causes a 4% reduction in voter turnout. Thus, we negate.
Anyone not ready? Is anyone not ready? We're at it. Zuber and I affirm resolve. The United States federal government ought to reparations to African Americans. Reparations is defined by the International Center for Transitionary Justice through past examples including social programs, cash payments, and symbolic measures. Observation 1, Professor Kaplan of Hall writes that most of the debate over reparations is focused too far in the past, and because housing discrimination in the late 20th century is more recent and more connected to African American poverty today, it should be central to our debate. We contend that the racist housing policy has devastated African Americans. Redlining, orchestrated by the Federal Housing Administration, is the practice of designating certain neighborhoods for African American housing. Economist Richard Rothstein writes that certain neighborhoods, redlining was purposeful action by the federal government which employed explicitly racial laws, policies, and regulations to ensure that black Americans would live impoverished and separately from whites. Even though redlining ended in 1968, Rothstein writes that a lack of mobility means that today our communities are just as segregated as they were 50 years ago. This has led to 3 injustices that can be alleviated with reparations. First, a wealth gap. Journalist David Dan writes in The Salon last year that the most direct way for the American middle class to acquire wealth in the post-war era has been through their homes. But since black could not build home equity, they were simply cut off from the opportunity, broadening a racial wealth gap that exists today. Coates from The Atlantic explains that today white households are worth roughly 20 times as much as black households. Reparations can help in 3 ways. First, grants. Law professor Ajoya Toro suggests that giving grants for down payments on homes, which would help give African Americans increased access to home ownership. Second, baby bonds. Jamel Bowie of Slate advocates for federally mandated investment accounts with modest growth rates, known as baby bonds, that can help ameliorate wealth inequality for future generations. Hamilton and Darity outlined that these baby bonds could lead to $60,000 for every individual receiving one once they have matured. Third, tax credits. Jeffrey Garter of UCLA writes that a $1,000 tax credit increases employment rates by 3.6%. Alden Buckner continued writing that these tax credit programs increase the chance that an individual family will be above the poverty line by 53%. Second, on educational inequality. According to Rothstein, segregated housing also led to intensely segregated and unequal education. David Williams writes that a student in a segregated African-American school is 14 times more likely to be in a high-poverty school than a student in a predominantly white school. This has led to a significant racial gap in educational achievement as reported by the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Harvard legal scholar Charles Ogletree writes that a reparations scheme would include improving the quality of black schools. This could be achieved in 4 ways. First, federal funding for public schools in red-line districts. Jackson, in 2014, for the National Bureau of Economic Research, finds that a 20% increase in school funding decreases the likelihood of later poverty by 20% and increases graduation rates by 23%. Second, transitioning teachers. Stanford economist Eric Konishek finds that transitioning even mediocre teachers to poor districts could increase African-American GDP by trillions of dollars and transform education in poor neighborhoods. Third, cash transfers. Jacob et al. Explains that a $1,000 cash transfer leads to an average of 6.9% increase in the chance of high school graduation. Fourth, preschool programs. A 2005 High School Educational Research Foundation study found that low-income children who had pre-K were 17% more likely to graduate from high school. Education reparations are important because economist Roland Farr finds that when you control for education through test scores, 70% of black white income gap disappears. Third, health inequality. African Americans have been disproportionately affected by environmental degradation because regulations have been less strictly enforced in these urban areas. A 2002 EPA study found that 71% of African Americans live in counties that violate federal air pollution standards compared to 58% for the white population. This creates a public health risk. Professor Williams and Collins explained that conditions linked to race were responsible for the premature deaths of more than 1 million African Americans just in the 2 past decades alone. Professor Randall offers 2 solutions to reparations. First, the removal of toxic dumps and landfills from African American communities. Right now, more than 57% of African Americans live in a community with at least one uncontrolled toxic waste dump, so removing toxic dumps would dramatically increase African American health. And second, on construction of hospitals. Construction of hospitals in redline communities which severely lack access to health facilities. This is important because according to Karen Jones from George Washington University, this lack of hospitals forces 44% of African Americans to forgo needed medical care. You mind if we see bacon? For help? No, for me. We have the full video.
Is it okay to start from?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait. Oh, if I can get this before.
Oh, yeah, no.
Thank you guys.
No worries.
So, bacon in Discourse and Brophy in Buddhism.
Oh, just the back.
Yeah, these the only things. I won't want
Are good?
No, I have to give you one more.
And bacon.
You're open, guys.
Are you guys doing that? Yeah. Okay. So, is it okay if I take the first question? So, I counted, right? You have like 9 different advocacies. If we win 4 of them and you win 5 of them, how would we resolve the debate?
Well, if we can prove it, like, impact, like, if we outweigh, if our solvency is outweigh,
No, like if I turn 5 of them and you win 4 of
and
them.
we outweigh. I don't
So like
understand.
your 4 have to outweigh the 5.
Yeah, we outweigh. So if you can turn like one and prove that it's like infinitely more important than the other 9, I don't understand why that's like confusing to you.
Okay, fine. You can take a question.
Yeah, sure. Where do you show that reparations have increased in media, like bad media discourse?
That's not the argument. We say that the media right now portrays African Americans in a negative light, and passing reparations, after reparations get passed, the media would like increase the negative coverage.
Are African Americans viewed in a negative light right now?
Yeah, by the media.
So what does reparations do? That's what I'm asking.
They start talking about it more, and we say that when people start hearing those like bad comments more, that re-entrenches like the implicit biases.
In your study, you said that NPR reported on it, and that it's like already bad in the status quo.
Yeah, that was the evidence that says that the media portrays African Americans in a negative light in the status quo.
But you don't prove how reparations increase them.
I'm not saying that they're going to start portraying them more negatively. They're going to start portraying them negatively more often.
Why? You don't show the way.
Okay, like if a policy gets passed, it's just like inherent that people are going to start talking about it more, right?
But there's also debate before the policy. I don't understand.
Okay, so like, well, I mean, before the policy, like, they're still arguing about whether or not it should get passed.
Sure.
But after it gets passed, they're going to be like mad about it getting passed.
Okay, that's right.
So, okay, yeah. Can I take a question under like from like a framework point of view, right?
Yeah.
Do you agree that the government has a moral obligation to protect the provide for good consequences for its citizens?
Yeah, I would consequences, sure.
Okay, sure. Give me a question.
Yeah. I'm a little confused. You say like Brophy and a bunch of these authors that like are pro-reparations. Why?
Okay, so like, yeah, even if they like ultimately conclude neg for some reason that we don't agree with, they like we don't they cite like pieces of evidence that we cite. Like we don't use their opinions to like advance our
I mean, like,
argumentation.
honestly, Brophy's like one of the biggest supporters of reparations in the entire.
No, I get that, right? But like the only thing we use from Brophy is like empirics, right? We don't actually use his opinions because that would be like strawmanning the card. Now, can I ask you a question about like you talk about like your definition of reparations are like based on what they are in the past, right? So why haven't they worked in the past?
I mean, we've seen NCAA employment. We've seen more arousing. I mean, like it's not even that bad.
No. I'm talking about like very specific examples of reparations, right? Like why haven't they worked and like given all the good benefits that you talk about in your case?
I'm not sure I understand. They have. Look to like
okay.
Look at the reparations in the Caribbean. Like the really good positive discourse is changing how the government's thinking right now.
What about reparations to Native Americans?
Like arguably that's pretty bad, but like
so
the policies that would be implemented now are like a lot better.
The policies right now towards Native Americans are better.
That was a long time ago. I don't understand.
All right, sure. You can take a question.
Yeah. I'm just gonna repeat the information. Yeah, sure.
Does that mean I need a new sheet of paper and then down your original page or down the one?
Yeah, the AC, sorry.
So you're not referring back to your partner's original one?
You're good. It is the interpretation of the affirmative defense and advocacy. They must defend it unconditionally. The violation is that the affirmative proposes at least 10 different advocacies of which they only need to defend like one to win the round. We check for the violation at crossings. They say they can prove that one policy outweighs, then they win. That means they can kick out of the plans in order to only use certain plans. That's the violation of the interpretation. Now, here are the standards. One is ground skew. This denies neg 100% of the ground because no argument can answer the plans that they can give. They can easily kick out of turns and terminal defense and turn every one of their blippy plans into a free source of no-risk offense that is likely to have specific benefits that are reasons to prefer them. Ground is key to fairness because it's the basis of all argumentation. 2 is predictability. We have no way of knowing which of their plans they're going to go for, which means we can't form a coherent strategy to answer their case, right? This is supercharged because they gain a positive time trade-off for every time they kick out of the turns. Strat is key to fairness because debaters can't win rounds without a coherent strategy. Time skew is key to fairness and outweighs because it is a prereq to making arguments entirely. 3 is reciprocity. We have to defend the NC harms unconditionally, just not the harms of specific plans. Reciprocity is key to fairness because it ensures that debaters have to do the same amount of work to gain access to your ballot. D is the voter. Reject them on face because they undermine fairness. There's 3 justifications. 1, debaters Debate is a competitive activity with wins and losses, so no debater should have to have a harder time to win the round. This precludes your ability to determine who's the better debater. 2, the round is irreparably skewed. We had to invest time and effort to alter our strategy to check abuse. There's no reparations for this. 3, set a precedent. Binding them to one advocacy is not enough because even if the next round is tougher for them, they'll still get away with using the same kind of strategy on the next topic. This is voting them down sends a message that this kind of abuse will not be tolerated. Now on the AC. First, you have to realize that all of the plans that they give you have no inherency or probability at all. They don't tell you that voting for the pro means that we're going to be using like grants or the removal of toxic dumps or any of the plans that they talk about. This is for a few reasons. First, they don't prove specifically that they're going to be implemented in the exact ways that they talk about. Derek Bell writes that reparations will only be pushed through Congress if it's the interest of the elite and if they can wash their hands of it afterwards. A, this means that a precondition of everything is like complacency because the elites who decide the policies will be able to wash away like the issues A, or that links hard into complacency, but B, they have to prove to you that these policies, like the 10 that they talk about, are very specifically tailored towards the elite. Then, specifically, Page and Farber tells you that social policy called government reparations is not actually a reparation, right? All their arguments are social policies that can help every single race. They don't have to be specifically tailored to that individual race. They also talk about how like, we're going to use like all these programs at once. Yamamoto specifically finds that racist policymakers won't be inclined to do anything that helps minorities because it's their subordination that contributes to their political success. So at the end of the day, there's 3 burdens that they have to overcome in order to access their specific plans. Now let's go into some of them specifically. They talk about baby bonds and like handing out educational vouchers, right? So this is going to be really unconstitutional, as Bowie specifically says, the same author that they cite in case that the courts would kill baby bonds because they deny equal opportunity and undermine colorblindness. And this actually is really applicable to other arguments like housing grants and as well as like removing toxic dumps because all minorities are affected by this, not just African Americans. Then we tell you that baby bonds and other programs trade off with current colorblind reform. Hillary Clinton proposes a new plan for babies to receive $5,000 in bonds that's going to be put into effect soon, right? And Obama is also proposing things like free tuition. Baby bond reparations would only derail those plans and drain political momentum from any future reforms that are colorblind and affect every race and every minority that needs help. Inevitably, the reason that you're not going to be looking towards race-specific policies is because it leads to stigmatization. Legrand of The Guardian tells you that race-specific recipients of bonds and other programs are inevitably seen as people who can only succeed because of handouts from the government. That means that when you use specifically race-tailored policies, there are specifically race-tailored harms, whereas if you use the colorblind method, you're going to be solving for all harms to all minorities and circumventing these harms. Then talk about EITC. This is not a reparation because it's conditional. You have to earn money in order to get it. So you can turn it back there. Then they talk about how like basically there's going to be changes in education. We tell you that this should be happening right now because everyone gets an education. There's no reason to specifically prefer changes for African American schools. And this is especially true because there are no African American schools. We tell you the least restrictive means of helping everyone who takes an education is to change the entire system as a whole, right? Like better teachers and like better conditions should be specifically applicable to every single race. And they also talk about like moving health, like hospitals and like getting rid of toxic dumps. First, realize that every minority that lives in the ghetto is affected by these toxic dumps or this lack of access to hospitals. At the end of the day, there's no reason to specifically prefer like African Americans. The harms that they talk about are not derived as a result of policies that are specifically directed against African Americans, but against risk factor areas, which means we're looking at poverty, not race. At the end of the day, all their justifications for actions apply to all minorities rather than just one race. And it's for this reason that we strongly urge you vote for the negative.
So, we'll be running a little bit of time. This is the final round. Please let them prep.
Taken, 46.
Is everybody ready? I'll be doing overview, their case, their one-off, their responses to our case. So you can flow the overview wherever you want. Griffin will extend the summary, and then you need our flow, their one-off flow, and then their case. Sound good? Everybody. Start off with the overview on the entire case. First off, the neg has no fiat in this round. They cannot prove that any of their problems passed. They cannot prove that there is any solvency in the status quo. They are advocating for the status quo, which is colorblind, will show why that's bad, and the reparations actually uniquely kick out of the status quo. But with that, let's walk down their case. A couple reasons why. First, if reparations uniquely increase race consciousness from the contention one about complacency, we actually turn this first up. Yamamoto explicitly writes that reparations are actually needed to combat institutional bias and institutional racism on this. Yamamoto concludes in his essay, in his study, that he is actually pro-reparations. It doesn't matter what he thinks, it actually matters what he concludes. They just strawman his argument. Don't buy it there on face. But then another reason why you're voting is Don Rojas writes specifically in the Caribbean, when we enacted reparations in the civil form, we actually kicked out of a colorblind status quo, which uniquely solved for racism in the Caribbean. That is a unique empiric that you're going to be weighing in today's round, because the Harvard Law Review finds that reparations will only be successful if they emulate South African reparations and civil reparations in the Caribbean. That's why we're going to be proving probability. That's why you're going to be voting on face on app. But then remember, Tim Weiss says that 30% of racial discrimination in 2008 is discriminated or is eliminated the moment you're starting talking about reparations through the enaction of reparations. That's why you're going to be voting, because we're actually going to be solving for racism. They're just perpetuating the status quo, which is colorblind. Then a couple of reasons why their second contention is wrong. First, another thing about their impacts. First off, Millman's only talking about white people who get angry through reparations. He's only saying that, yeah, white people get angry, that's backlash, that stops solvency. He doesn't actually provide any warrants for this. Then the next thing is about bound forward. First off, turn their evidence, because Yamamoto says that when we gave reparations to Japanese Americans, it actually led to an increase in Japanese Americans joining the NAACP. Reparations logically do the same thing, and he advocates that they do the same thing for African Americans. More NAACP members. This is actually how Chen does the study. Chen finds that NAACP members, particularly Japanese Americans, led to the actual 1990 Civil Rights Act and the 1991 Civil Rights Act. Turn the Chen card. We're actually increasing fair legislation through the enaction of reparations, because historically that's what happens, right? The fact is, even if they cite theory, even if they cite any arguments, none of it is based in grounding, none of it is based in empirics. We have the evidence on our side. Then after their contention about discourse, this is the only place where they're getting offense. First off, their impact is pretty fiat. They don't actually weigh this, they don't actually say how this discourse is uniquely bad. When we pass reparations, it's only the discourse talking about reparations is bad. Fine. Everybody in this room is more racist according to the plan. That's not a good reason to vote neg on face. They have no uniqueness on this offense. Then a couple reasons why this is wrong. First, Crahan argues that reparations actually tip this balance in favor. First off, he says the warrants for this is one, that reparations, when they are argued, say Fox News portrays people in a bad light. Then people see Fox News portraying people in a bad light, and they say, hey, that's racist. We turn that argument right there, and based on that, he says that people actually shift from the right to the center and back to the left. Crahan actually does a meta-analysis not only of the gay rights movement, but specifically applies it to reparations movement, and says that this will actually lead to positive discourse in the future, especially because of the reparations movement. Not only that, he only says that the impacts of bad discourse are short-term. Then, try this again, because Bacon specifically concludes in their own evidence that she is actually pro-reparations. Not only that, she finds that reparations may cause this bad discourse, but uniquely reparations actually combat institutional bias and stuff like that. Then, a couple reasons why they're not going to be solving. First off, because the neg has no fiat, there's a couple reasons why. First, they strawman Gilliam. Gilliam says, sure, solutions lead to 7% increase. Everything that we advocate in case is a solution. The fact is, either you buy their theory shell or you buy Gilliam. They can't buy both, because their theory shell is based on us advocating for solutions, but you're not going to be buying that, because not only are we advocating for solutions, we're actually increasing race consciousness, which Gilliam argues leads to 7% future reforms. Turn that right there. But then another reason why you're going to be voting for us is that colorblind policies in the status quo are actually really bad. Tim Weiss writes that the universal programs actually ignore the uplift of African Americans, that ignore the racism. Tim Weiss and Manning Merrill also find that racism is uniquely justified through the inequality that is in the status quo, but reparations uniquely solve for this. That's the justification of racism, where the only center does anything to replicate this, to the point where they don't have anything talking about how we're not alleviating the inequality, and they also don't talk about how we're not stopping the racist institutions. They can't win this debate because they're not actually combating the biggest impact of today's round. Then until they're off. Their entire off is based on topicality about fairness. First off, in any single public forum debate, we are allowed to have any contention that we can choose. Two, it's totally fair that we get to choose our advocacy, because if we outweigh, we win. It doesn't matter if they do terminal defense. If we outweigh, we win. That's the metric of any debate. Three, the only thing that they're picking from is if we have fiat for these things passing, which we do. And the fourth thing is that they are entirely predicating this on they can pass other forms of programs in this place. That's not fair. They don't have fiat. We can win on this round if we prove that we outweigh on net if reparations are good. That's the only way to evaluate this debate is fair, because otherwise you're just going to be saying, sure, the pro team has a better case than the neg team, so let's just vote for the neg team. And that's where you're going to be voting pro. I didn't get to their case. Or our case.
Our case is totally better. Doing good. So let's talk about this Crahan evidence, right? He says like people shift their opinions because of reparations. So can you just explain why?
Okay, so the first thing, he hits a couple of words. First one
Just
is,
one word.
okay, gotcha. So the first one that he brings up is when people see discourse like from Fox News saying that, hey, African Americans are lazy and stuff like that, they actually shift to the left because they realize that this is inherently racist, and that only happens after the enaction of a policy that actually combats.
So like, why do they realize that things are racist instead of just internalizing the implicit biases on the media?
Right, so there's a couple reasons. First off is that people aren't innately racist, they see the justifications for these
Okay,
problems.
sure.
To the point where we're solving for inequality, creating rights. When you actually have solutions in place for these issues, you actually see this rollback of like.
Right,
rather
so
than
people
being
aren't
anti-racist.
innately racist, but we make the argument that everyone has implicit biases, right?
I
So what does he
agree
take into account of that? Okay,
Right.
sure.
The,
So
the
then how do
entire
people realize
point,
that, like,
the entire point is him and Tim Weiss argue that implicit biases are based on what we perceive in the real world. We're not born with implicit bias, right?
I would
People
argue
aren't
that by
born
the
with
time that
hate.
you're able to like perceive and interact with the media, then you
So
already
then how
have
do you
implicit
grow
biases.
implicit bias? How do you grow it? Is it just
Education,
like culture
strategy,
in your gut?
environment, culture, yeah, everything, right? Like
So
that's just how
culture's in your gut. Right, the whole point is it's perceived. It's how people are
Yeah.
interacting with you. But to the point where we're actually decreasing the actual representation and the reason why we actually have racism and implicit bias in
Yeah,
society.
I don't know what
create
that
arguments
means.
that we're
Okay,
wrong.
sure, you can go.
Okay. So your one-off is basically saying that we can't extend one advocacy, right?
No, it's that no matter what you do, because you're running so many advocacies, it skews us to defend every single plan and have like any sort of like harm that's not in the NC that responds to the AC, and two, and more importantly, it's like not reciprocal because like
Do
you have
we
to respond
have-
to all your harms and
Do
still
we have a
extend
plan
it.
text? Do we have a plan text on it?
No, I'm not saying you have a plan text.
Okay, so how are we bound to any of our advocacies in the movie?
Okay, are they advocacies or not?
Yes.
So if we vote for the pro, then X happens and X doesn't happen or something like that, right?
Sure.
Right. So I would make the argument that in order for us to win, we have to prove that every single X is really bad, and you only have to prove that
You just need to prove that any one of the X's or on-face reparations are worse. That's all you need to do.
So
very fair.
we can kick all of your plans. I really am confused.
Look,
with
if
what
you
you're saying.
kick one of our plan and prove that it's worse, which you didn't in rebuttal, then you can win.
I'm not sure. Wait, what do you mean? If I kick one of your plans, how do I?
If you not kick, if you say that any one of our plans have worse impacts than all the other ones combined or whatever, then you can win.
Right. So if a vote for the pro is a vote for every single one of those plans that you just
No,
talked
it's just whatever we extend it.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. Okay, sure. Can I have a question?
Right, I know what you're saying, that it's unfair that we can just extend it to summary, because
It
the whole
kinda
point
is.
no, the whole point is reparations will take the most plausible form, right?
Oh,
That's
really?
right.
Really? So the most probable.
No. Sorry. No. The reason why I read the overview about Donna Rojas is specifically talking about how reparations will take the best form, and these are the outline solutions that happen.
Okay, and let's
That's
talk
the-
about that overview, right? So what is the warrant that gives for why reparations will inevitably take the best form? no matter
Okay,
what?
so first off, the United States doesn't just look at internal past precedent for problems, they look at international.
Okay, and my argument is that the United States is inherently run by racist policymakers, so they
Doesn't
don't see
matter.
any reason
We
to
feel
not
that
implement the best
reparations pass. We don't care.
Okay,
we
it's
don't
an
need to
odd
advocate
resolution, right?
for the-
It's an odd
It
resolution.
doesn't
You don't
matter.
get
We
to
fiat
fiat
that it
everything.
passes. We fiat that reparations
Why don't you just like fiat that the judges vote for the act?
Fine.
It's not everything. It's not a reason
Fiat the
to
judges
vote
vote for the act. You're still helping African Americans on
Okay.
our side and perpetuating complacency on there.
Guess I lose that.
Yes, I lose then.
Alright, so I'm gonna do our third contention, and then down their case, and then the like shell at the end if I get time. Okay.
They read exactly 0 responses to our third contention, extended cleanly. The first thing to extend is budget cuts. This outweighs their case for a couple of reasons. First is scope. Welfare affects the poor of every race, while reparations focus on only one. Second is time frame. Reparations won't have generational, long-lasting impacts, but shifting to a new federal paradigm of cutting welfare spending and social security benefits will affect the population for dozens of decades. But third is probability. We don't know if reparations will work to solve poverty, but in the status quo, millions of people are already relying on welfare to eat and pay for education. There's a 100% chance of harm, but no guarantee of benefit. Second, on voting pattern, this outweighs their case for 3 reasons. First, they preclude change. Establishing a 2-1 majority on all policies and essentially giving minorities half a vote makes it impossible to do anything to help minorities in a political sense. But second is scope. Unfairly passed policies can affect more groups than just African Americans. But third is reversibility. When people speak out against African Americans and establish voting blocks to propagate their interests, they're unlikely to take those statements back, making our impacts permanent. Now, go to their case. As an impact, force them to defend probability. They give these 9 different advocacies, and only a couple of them have been even implemented before. They need to prove that the government will implement these things, and there's 2 cards that should extend from summary. First, the card that says that reparations are only going to implement the benefits of elites, which puts them in a double bind. A, their policies don't get implemented because they need to help the elites, or B, their policies don't get implemented at all. But second, they need to show that their policies are the most narrowly restricted to not help more than just African Americans, right? And that's going to apply to all their advocacies. Now go to the turn that Max reads on their first contention on stigmatization, right? So we tell you that if we give them reparations and it actually helps them, then that's just, even if it decreases racism, it's just increased stigmatization and make it look like African Americans can only be successful with handouts. Now go to the theory shell. He says that if we outweigh with what they win, then it's okay, but ignores our argument. We're saying that that itself isn't fair because you can sever out any offense we generate on their case because you can just stop advocating for your plans at any time of the round. He concedes it's in process. Extend the reciprocity standard that says that we have to defend our harms unconditionally. While they can kick theirs out at any time, that makes it really unfair. But then extend the predictability standard that we can never know what they're going to do. They drop a voter, so that means that's a reason to vote for us. Thank you, and vote affirmative. No, negative.
We'll take that. Going one off. Then.
Sorry, does that mean you want a new sheet of paper?
No, sorry. I'll be going to the one off. Okay. I'll be going to the theory shell. Oh, thank God. Then I'll be going to our case and their case, okay? So one off, our case, their case. Starting off, we have this whole bit about the theory shell. Remember, it's not important because in public forum, we get to decide whatever advocacies we want. In policy, it makes sense because you're held to a plan text, but this is not policy, it's public forum. We can advocate for whatever we want. They can advocate for 19 different harms and reparations. We have to prove those all out. We can do the same on the pro. Then they say that we can step out of every advocacy, then we can only go for things with offense. Sure, I'll only go for things with offense and explain why we're right. Then go to our case. Look at the reader overview. They say Bell says that reparations will only help the white elite. First, Reed Gilliam, my partner Reed Gilliam, says that when we pass reparations, it's going to lead to 7% more support for policy. So even if it's bad policy, it's going to lead to more support in general, which is going to be more support for better policy in the future. Then secondly, Bell also says that reparations could be maybe flip-flops. He says reparations could also kick out of this badness from the government. Then he says, then go to Bowie. He says Bowie says that the unconstitutional doesn't matter because our programs later on we say the tax credits. Bowie's also talking about tax credits. And tax credits are constitutional unconstitutional because we can give tax credits every single day. The government talks about tax credits. This is also a probability because we can give tax credits. Like it's so simple. Then they say the trade-off. Like Hillary Clinton is going to say that like, well, we have programs in the status quo. This is going to trade off. This is ridiculous because Hillary Clinton will literally say anything to get elected. Then they talk about gardening and says it's going to be stigmatized, but this is not true because in the status quo they're still stigmatized. They never put the link between reparations going to increase stigmatization. That's still a reason to affirm. Then onto their case. You're going to be not voting. You don't vote on anything they just said because remember the Gilliam card. It says that 7% for more policies. Their entire third contention is turned by this. They say that they said it's going to increase voting power or decrease voting power. It doesn't matter because we're still on net going to be increasing this political power. They say the white has all the power in the power structure. Gilliam says that when we pass reparations, it's going to lead to 7% more power or like more political activism in the entire power structure. So by the white power structure, we still increase it. And then still reason to affirm. Remember my partner says about inequality. We are solving for the inequality, which is the justification for racism. Tim Wise says that when we give reparations, we talk about race, and that leads to 30% less racism. That is a clear reason to affirm.
Good? Okay. Are our judges ready? So let's establish a dynamic process. Are reparations backwards looking?
Sure, but it was extended through 90 some reasons.
No, I'm just asking.
No.
They're not backwards looking?
Every international historical precedent that we cite has been forward looking. So.
And you don't refute that.
Wait. So a couple things, right? First of all, just because every international precedent is forward-looking doesn't mean that this one won't be backwards-looking. I'm asking
but
why.
it doesn't mean that this one will be back.
Yeah, you're right.
Right,
Here's
so-
my argument, right?
Why are we even having this argument?
Because I want to talk about the Gilliam evidence, right? Because the Gilliam evidence, in her very specific conclusion, says that discussions about race can't start with history, right? So even if you want to access those impacts in
I
her
don't even see that on
conclusion.
the flow, Max. Like,
Yeah, you don't extend it through summary, and I read my turn when she says that.
Okay, sure.
talking
I
about
mean,
things in
if
a
that's how
solution
you want
by-
to play this game, then
Look,
sure.
talking about things in a solution by context, she argues increases for 4.6%.
yeah, solutions.
Okay, sure.
And reparations uniquely a solution.
That's
Well,
fine.
not.
Yeah, you can have fun.
Okay, so we went for, I guess, not every see. Are we still being unfair to you?
Yes, actually, it's even more unfair.
Why?
Because you're generating a positive time trade-off because I drew us an entire rebuttal response.
I only went for things that you went for.
I
That's
mean,
only
it doesn't
because-
matter, right? It's not that you did, it's that you can, right?
No, the fact is it's not that we
Yeah,
can,
okay,
it's what
so-
we do.
wait,
It's the actions that determine the
like
outcome.
even if you don't want to vote on like round two, right? There's still predictability. Like his rebuttal was completely skewed by the fact that he had to check for abuse in the first place, and that would have severely decreased. the
Fine,
amount of
don't read your
responsibility,
off, you
right?
still have time to rebuttal our points.
I guess you could have said that.
We've
before.
lost 2 rounds of this tournament, they've done the same thing. Why can't you?
Wait, what?
Right? Why can't you read enough offense to
Well, that's kind of our
rebuttal?
point,
Yeah,
right? Like
we figured out twice.
you as a team, like Nueva, have been running this like abusive case since like the
That's
farmers.
not
Okay, this is like, I don't know where this conversation is going. I don't want to like start talking about it. Just ask a question.
Okay. How about your status quo is something? You like Hillary Clinton says that
No, I'm arguing that these are things that are proposed that will be traded off because of the loss of political
Max,
will.
I have a better question. Okay, right now, so you say that Derek Bell says like the power structure, like white has the power structure, right?
Yeah.
So if we can prove that like reparations are going to like enact under this power structure and increase white support for reparations, would that like you're saying that like blacks are going to lose voting power, but you just said that like blacks don't have voting power
Wait,
or don't have implementation.
Well, this isn't the 1800s, man. Like, I'm just trying to make the argument that like
No, seriously, Derek Bell says that everything has to be white power structure. That's what Derek Bell says. And then you say that blacks are going to lose this political power. Like to be brutally honest, like honestly, that doesn't matter because we're increasing like white support for African Americans.
Okay, so how do you do that?
by solving one for inequality by
No. Like this is the Gilliam evidence, right? That's how you're
No,
looking into
there's a couple of things, right? Our
Yeah.
entire case is predicated on the fact that our solutions come from the same things that were implemented with the team.
I'm just asking you. Before my final focus, right? I just want to know how are you increasing white support for programs?
We're decreasing implicit racism.
Okay, so the link is racism.
The link is
You have a card that says that
That's fine, that's fine.
Yeah, increases them.
All right, so like 20, was it 23 seconds?
Oh, it's also something like that.
Yeah, 23 seconds. just going to go, I guess I should do our shell first, and then down to some of the arguments that are at the top of my rebuttal that weren't on the off, and then to weighing from contention 3. Okay? They force the neg to defend the NC harms unconditionally, not just the harms of specific plans. It's unfair. They say we can run a lot of harms and they have to respond to all of them, but we can't kick out of our harms. They can kick out of their plans. Then, predictability, right? We didn't know which one of their plans they were going to go for in the summary. They say that, oh, we only responded with the plans that you responded to, right? But we didn't know that, so they still get that positive time trade-off. But even then, right, the round is already irreparably skewed to the point where we had to invest our time to alter our strategy, check abuse. It doesn't matter if like they're not actually abusing. It's the fact that they can create that abuse that generates the reason why you should sign your ballot right there. So at the end of the day, they're losing theory. Don't let them come up and respond to it in the final focus. Now let's go on to the arguments that they completely drop. They give you some unwarranted analysis in the cross-sex about how every policy is always the best. This is abusive and inherently untrue, right? Like we all know it's not true. The ballot evidence that they say basically says that, oh, he flip-flops and he says that, okay, maybe we can do reparations, right? But he says that we can only do reparations under one condition, that it's in the interest of the elite. This is something that goes unresponded to in the summary until the summary, and they don't respond to it coherently, right? The argument that we're telling you is really, really important is that none of the things that they're advocating for are probable to be implemented because they all help minorities, and this is where the Yamamoto evidence kicks in. They don't respond to this except by saying that he concludes apt. We're saying even if his opinion is apt, the things that you're stating are factual, and the facts are that white Americans do not have any form of interest in helping African Americans or minorities because they benefit from subordination. Insofar as that's true, none of the plans that they talk about are very probable at all because they all help African Americans in a great and profound way, right? So insofar as that's true, they're not accessing any of their plans, they don't have probability, they don't tell you what happens when you vote for the affirmative. But even if you don't buy any of that, one clean card that they never respond to is the page from Harvard evidence. She specifically says that social policy cannot be justified as a reparation if it can help other races. This is completely dropped. This is the safest place to sign your ballot. Everything that they're advocating for is a social policy that can be 100% justified as a vote for the negative. Now let's go to the reason why you're going to be voting for us. That's contention 3. It is the cleanest place to vote. They literally have no ink on it whatsoever. It's extended in summary. We give you weighing for it. We tell you that 1, cut and go affects every single race, not just African Americans, which means we're already outweighing on like magnitude. And insofar as that's true, we're also outweighing on time period because it affects people down the road later on. Then specifically on the argument that we make about voter blocks, we're precluding change whatsoever. Even if people participate more or are more willing to vote for things, we tell you that public support doesn't necessarily imply more policies because like public opinion doesn't imply like policies. We're just saying we're precluding change and creating a political system where African Americans and other minorities can't succeed. It's for this reason that we strongly urge you to vote for the negative.
We'll take 5 seconds. Okay.
Is everybody ready? I'm going to start off with their theory, then reasons to vote for. Start off with their theory, Shell. The first thing that they say is that, yes, we went for the arguments that they talked about that's proving that there's no time skew in the first off. But the second reason is their thing is not predicated on whether or not we can. They cannot win on whether or not we can do a time skew. It's whether or not we will or we have. That's the only offense that they're gaining on that argument. The next thing is that my partner extends this in summary that we are not advocating or bound to a planned text. The argument that they're cutting is specifically from policy where people are bound to a planned text that they advocate for. That's not public forum. We can advocate for as many advocacies as they want. So can they. They can kick out of them too. They don't give you any analysis why they can't. Then on to reasons why you should vote pro. By the way, the inequality or the off should not be a vote. Reason to vote for. First off, they don't respond to my observation to that's my partner extends to his summary, where he specifically says that they need to show that they are proving for the status quo that the status quo is either better or worse than better than the alternative of enacting reparations. They don't have feet on this round. They cannot prove that reparations pass. This is crucial because we are the only side that is actually combating or stopping structural inequality. You're extending 3 pieces of evidence on this. First is Gilliam. They don't respond to this in summary. Don't let them respond to it in final focus. Max tries to make a new argument. But the reason why you're voting is because she says that there's 7% increase in reforms when you frame things in a historical context that reparations uniquely do, particularly our advocacies. Then you're going to be voting on Tim Wise, who said that implicit bias decreases by 30% only explicitly in jury discrimination, but implicit bias also completely goes away. He writes that right now we are in a colorblind society. I read this in my rebuttal. They don't respond to this. Griffin extends it to summary. You're going to be voting off that because right now they can never do anything to stop racial inequality, which is literally the biggest terminal impact. Then their only offense is their contention 3. First, Gilliam turns this. Then they don't respond to Crahan. That's why we don't bring it up in summary. Don't let them bring it up in their final focus either, because Crahan specifically says that all discourse, even the discourse Discourse that they're talking about turns positive over time. It's a meta-analysis of different actions in which you've either taken reparations or done civil rights movements, and then the last thing that you're voting on is the fact that we're actually increasing future legislation. They don't respond to the Yamamoto turn, that it increased NAACP findings, and that Chen says that NAACP actually led to a new civil rights movement in the 1990s, and that's what we're doing with this reparations. That's why you have to be voting pro, because we're kicking out of a colorblind status quo, and that's why you'd be strongly for